Hey guys, Jack Diamond here with another Lightwave tutorial. In the last couple tutorials I showed you a basic introduction to Lightwave and then got into some of the details of Lightwave Modeler. Today I'm going to do the same with the other half of Lightwave, which is Lightwave Layout. This is the place where you actually take your models, set up your lighting, set up your cameras, and create animations, and that's what we're going to do today. I want to show you the basics of keyframing, and then I'm going to show you some more advanced stuff like dynamics as well. Okay, we're going to start by basically stopping what I'm doing here, and I'm just going to clear the scene just to give you a full idea of everything from the ground up. So here's what Lightwave looks like when you load it up. Yours might look a little bit different, but I've just set mine up so it brings me to a camera view with no objects loaded, anything like that. So obviously the first thing you want to do is load an object. So we'll go to the Items tab here, go to Load Object. You can also click the shortcut, which is the plus key on the keyboard. And I'm just going to load in this gold dye object that I've been playing with here. So I'm going to move my camera just so I can see it by clicking on camera, and then I can use the modify tools, so move and rotate, just to move my camera around. Be careful when you use the move and rotate tools, because if you don't have the right object selected, like if you have object, you'll move the object. If you have camera, you'll move the camera, so just be careful of that. So I'm just going to back the camera up, move it up a little bit, move it over a little bit, and then I'm going to push Y on the keyboard to change to rotation, and then just sort of move it over. Maybe I'll do this a couple more times just to give myself a little bit better view. So there we go. I've basically moved my camera into position, and I'm ready to actually start animating. Before I do that, I think I want to actually set my camera up properly, which I really should have done first, but let's do that. So still with camera selected, select Properties. Last time I showed you how to use a real lens camera. This time I'm just going to leave the default perspective camera and switch my resolution to HD 1920 by 1080. So that's widescreen, uses most of the real estate here. And here's actually something neat. The multiplier is set to 100%, which means when I render this, it will actually render at 1920 by 1080. But I can easily change that to 50%, which would scale my resolution. I don't have to change my actual setting here, but basically this is a quick way to get quick previews and things like that. So for now, I'm just going to leave it at 100%. I'm also going to up my samples to, I don't know, maybe 4, just to give myself a little bit higher quality of output when I actually render. That's an anti-aliasing setting, by the way. So the first thing I want to do is animate this object just sort of bouncing up and down. In order to do that, first of all, I need to create a couple of keyframes. So hopefully you guys know how keyframes work and how interpolation works, which basically means you set up a position that you want the object to be at a certain time, set up another position at a different time, and then you let Lightwave sort of interpolate between the two. So as a good example here, I'm going to move over to, say, the end of my animation, which is currently set at frame 120. You can change this, by the way, just by changing the number over here in the corner. So for example, if I set this to 240, you'd see that now my animation is 240 frames long. But for my purposes, 120 seems fine. I'm going to create a keyframe here by moving my object up. And I just moved the camera accidentally, which is kind of a bad thing because I accidentally created a keyframe there. I'm going to delete the keyframe, and then I'll select my object. Remember, I told you it's really easy to do that. And I'm going to right click and just drag up a little bit. So I've now created a second keyframe. I can click this button to go all the way back to the beginning of my timeline, and then I'll click the play button, and you can see my object goes up. And as the animation sort of returns back to the beginning, you can see that it just keeps going up. But I don't want it to go up. I want it to go up and then down again. I want it to bounce, in fact. So let's do a little bit of math here. Let's say at frame 30, we'll hit the apex of our first bounce. Then at frame 60, it should actually hit the ground and bounce. At frame 90, it'll hit the apex again, and then at frame 120, it will hit the ground again. So we'll need to set that up. So first of all, I'm just going to copy some keys by aligning my my cursor at the 0 point here, clicking the Create Key button, and I want to create a key at frame 60, which is basically the middle of the animation. So these are the points where the animation will hit the ground, or where the cube will hit the ground. and I'm going to create a new frame at 120. So basically, those are the 2 points where my object hits the ground. I'm going to move forward to frame 30, and I'm going to create a new key here, but I'm just going to do that by dragging up. Because I have auto key on here, that means it's automatically created a key just by me raising the object up. But I can copy this key to frame 90 by clicking Create Key and typing in 90. Click OK. And now I have a keyframe at 0, a keyframe at 30, a keyframe at 60, a keyframe at 90, and a keyframe at 120. Hopefully that makes sense. We start at the ground, we go up, we go down, we go up, and we go back down again. And then the animation should loop such that we see 2 complete bounces. Let's see what happens if I back this up and click play. Well, the object is definitely going up and down like it should. Unfortunately, it's kind of doing some weird behavior. It doesn't actually look like it's bouncing at all. It looks like it's just sort of seesawing back and forth. And that's because of the curves that are actually being applied to this animation. So you can see if I just sort of go through this slowly, it does slow down when it gets to the top, and then it sort of eases forward. But when it gets back down to the bottom again, it does the same thing. It slows to a stop and then keeps going. Well, a real object wouldn't do that. A real object would accelerate towards the ground, and when it hits, it would bounce immediately, and all of that momentum would be transferred to the upward motion. So we can actually see the graph that Lightwave is generating by clicking on the graph editor over here and selecting the right channel. In this case, that would be the y-axis of my object here. And if I use auto fit selected, you can see exactly what's happening here. So the object starts with a good upward trajectory, and then it slows to a stop. And then as it goes down again, it actually accelerates downward, but then it begins to slow until it eases to a stop. Hey, my mouse's batteries are critical. That's something cool. Anyway, this point is basically the point where we're having a problem. So what you can actually do is mess with the curves, and you can adjust these manually by changing some of these settings, grabbing them, and whatnot. But what I'm going to do is adjust them using the incoming and outgoing settings here. So for example, I could change this to linear, and then you'd see a linear transition between the previous keyframe and this one. And this is not very realistic either, but I just wanted to show you that it is possible to have this linear interpolation. So I'm going to change this back to TCB spline. Did I say slime? I meant spline. And I'm going to change the continuity setting. And watch what happens when I drop this down to -1. Now I have no continuity between the incoming and the outgoing, which basically means it's going to give me this nice bounce effect that I'm looking for. Interesting enough, you might not be able to see this, but I can see it just because I've been doing this for a while. This slopes up a little bit here, and realistically, it wouldn't slope up here. This would actually be more of a downward curve. So I need to do some fixing to some of these as well. And so you can look at the way the continuity adjustment affects these keyframes as well. So let's go to this one and up. And to be honest with you, you can see that now the curve is more here than it is here. So we need to adjust these keyframes as well. Well, what happens when I change the continuity setting here? Well, I get some actually pretty weird results. So it's actually not the continuity setting that I want to deal with here. It's the tension setting. But I think I need to change the continuity first. So let's change the continuity to positive, and then we'll mess with the tension. And I think that's got it right there. And we'll do the same thing here. Change the continuity up, but then we'll change the continuity or the tension up as well. And now we have this sort of smoother curve. But actually it looks a little funny down here now. So maybe if I change the tension here, yep, that's got it. So now we've got these really smooth bouncing curves the way you would expect that to actually happen. So let's close out of this. Let's see how our animation has been affected. We'll rewind to the beginning and we'll play. And now we have a much more realistic looking bounce from our die. So the question is, do we really want a bouncing die? what I was hoping to accomplish in this would actually be a rolling die, something that I could actually, you know, roll and have it turn up a number, almost a random number kind of thing. Well, in traditional animation, you would actually have to do this by hand. You'd have to keyframe every single frame and figure out the roll and everything like that. But luckily, there are new tools such as dynamics. And I'm going to show you how dynamics work, but I need to delete basically all of these keyframes in order to apply the dynamics. So I'm just going to quickly go through and delete these keyframes. Delete, yes. Forward, delete, yes. Move forward, delete, yes. And now back to the very beginning, I now have no animation actually happening here. So I'm going to, first of all, on the first frame, well, frame 0, I'm going to raise my object up again. Okay. And then I'm going to apply dynamics to my object. And the way you do that is by clicking on FX Tools, and you can see that there's actually a dynamic system built right in. I usually like to turn dynamics off while I'm doing all the setup because it will calculate dynamics every time you make a setting change. So really you want to do all your settings first and then turn dynamics back on again. So I'm going to open up the Item Properties menu. This is Bullet Dynamics, which has been around for a while, but they just recently incorporated it into Lightwave. And now we need to tell it some things about the objects. For example, this object right here, we need to make into a special kind of object called a rigid body. So there it is. Now I've applied these rigid body dynamics to it, and I'm not going to get into the details right now of Bullet or how it works, but I'm just going to change this to convex pieces. I'll enable dynamics. And now it's going to do some calculating at the bottom. It's now calculated my full dynamics for this object. And when I click play, well, the object just falls really fast off the screen. That's because there's quite a bit of gravity that's been applied to my object. And also because there's nothing in the ground for it to actually hit. So I'm going to go over to my world settings here. I'm going to lower my gravity just a little bit down to say -5 instead of -9.8. I'm going to change my time scale to about 25%, and I'm also going to change my frame rate up to about 2000, which will basically just increase the quality of my animation or of my physics simulation here. So again, I'll click the play button, and now you can see it falls a lot slower, but it's still not hitting anything. So we need something for it to hit. So over to Modeler Tools, let's create a ground plane, and sure, 10 meter by 10 meter ground plane is fine. For this particular object, we need to also say that it is a special kind of body. We're going to call it a static body because static meaning it does not move in the scene. So basically it's still an object that will be affected by the physics here, but I'm going to use it as a collision object, which basically means it stays in place and objects hit it. So which makes sense for the ground. So I'm going to change this to box as well. Now, when I run my physics simulation again, boom, suddenly we have an object that falls and lands on the ground. You can see that little wiggle that the object still does when it hits the ground, and that's because of the quality settings. So I'm just going to increase the quality setting a little bit higher. I'm going to make this maybe 4000, and that'll hopefully fix that problem. Recalculate our dynamics, and now we don't have that object moving around anymore. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but obviously you came here to see more than just one die being dropped onto a flat ground. So let's add a little bit more randomness and fun here. So I'm going to go back to the first frame. I'm going to turn off dynamics while I do this again. I'm going to go to Modify, actually Items. Let's go to Items, make sure we have the die selected, and I'm going to clone that object. And I'm going to make about 4 copies of it, so I have 5 dice altogether. Does that sound reasonable to you? Sure. They all come in at exactly the same place, but they're all numbered, so basically all I have to do is sort of move them one at a time. I'm going to go to my top view so I can see the dice, and I'm going to move them all. So one there. Let's see, number 2 can go there. Number 3 can go there. Number 4 Can go there, and there we go. I now have 5 dice which are all going to fall and hopefully interact with one another. Now you're probably asking yourself, or not asking yourself, you probably recognize that by dropping these dice, they're probably all just going to fall and land flat in the same place, but I'm going to take care of that in a moment. But I know you're dying to see it as is, so I'm just going to recalculate the simulation, click play, and hey, we have 5 dice falling on a ground, which is not really that exciting, as promised. So one of the neat things you can do with this bullet dynamic system is you can advance a few frames, or maybe even just one frame, and you can add a keyframe to any one of these objects. So for example, if I were to take this particular object and on frame 1, go back to my camera view, or my top view here, I mean, and move it like this. So basically, just to show you here, if I go back, I've started here, and on frame 1, it goes to here. I've added a linear trajectory here. And what the dynamic system is actually going to do is calculate the rest of this motion, and then it'll go ahead and calculate all the collisions for all the other objects. I do need to make sure that all of the objects still have my physics applied to them, which they do. They're all dynamics enabled. So let's just go back to the beginning. Let's go back to our camera view, and let's click play. And now we have a whole bunch of dice which are hitting each other and rolling, which is kind of cool. I can also apply some sort of physics to all of the objects individually. So let's do that. Let's just change the way all of them behave. So maybe this one, oh, is that the one that's actually got the physics applied? No, it's that one in the end. So this one right here, we're just going to, well, on frame 0, I guess we'll move it back a little bit, but on frame 1, we'll move it in. So it's going to come in from the other direction. Say this one, on frame 1, it'll be here, but on frame 0, it'll be over here. So now it's really going to, now it's really going to jump in. A couple of these, let's do something a little different. Let's go to the front view, and I guess I should have picked one of those objects before I did that. So this one right here, well, this one we'll leave as is, but this one right here we will change to the front view, and we're going to apply on frame 1 a bit of downward motion. Make it upward motion. There. Now we've got some real cool stuff happening. So back to our camera view. The simulation is actually calculated on the fly as I do this, so all I have to do is click play, and you can see all these things are now being thrown around in a really realistic way, even though the time is slowed down a little bit. So one of the issues I might be having here, and I'm not entirely sure, is that I might have objects going through each other. Yeah, there is a little bit. So really, I need to figure out how my calculations are being done and what my limits should be and things like that, which you can change just by changing some of the settings in the dynamics engine. But to be honest with you, I'm not really that critical, because when it plays fast, it's kind of hard to see. What I do want to do is set my camera up in a position that's kind of cool to catch the end of this animation. So I'm just going to go to the last frame, and then with my camera selected, I will move using the T, Y, T, and I think I might need more frames, because I think this isn't quite at a standstill. So maybe go 200 frames. Let's create a key for my camera at frame 200. Let's delete the current keyframe. And actually, let's create a key at frame 0 as well. That way, actually, I can probably delete the key at frame 200. And let's go back and play the animation and see what happens. Still not done. That's kind of funny, actually. And there's a little bit of bounce, and there's a little bit of intersection. Let's change the intersection, and let's change the timing as well. All right, there we go. So I've tweaked a whole bunch of the settings and I've got a reasonable simulation happening. Without going into too much detail, basically what I did was use those two keyframes at frame 0 and frame 1 to add a strong initial rotation to each one of these dice. And now they're actually rotating the way they should and stopping the way they should. So I'm just going to do a quick test render here just to see what this looks like. Maybe I'll choose a frame somewhere around here, just where the dice roll is actually happening. And I'm just going to click the render frame button. So it's just going to take a few seconds to actually render out. I don't have a texture applied to the floor right now. I just have a texture applied to the dice themselves. But that's pretty cool. That's basically what it looks like. I'm also not using any bounce light or reflectivity or anything like that. So maybe just for kicks, I'll add a quick texture to the floor. Something, let's see, let's just do like a maybe a black floor with a procedural texture. Let's go maybe a checkerboard, and we'll make the checkerboard red. This is a pretty standard 3D animation type thing here. Let's make that about 20 centimeters, which would be 200 millimeters. So that's how big the actual texture is going to be on the ground. Let's add a little bit of reflection in there. Let's punch this up to VPR just so we can see. That looks pretty cool. And then if I do my actual test render here, you can see it just spits that out just a little bit slower, but with a little bit higher quality. It's adding the anti-aliasing in and everything, and it's rendered it in about 8 seconds. And there's the frame, basically. It's not HD because it's only showing me 50%, but if I go up to 100%, you can actually see the quality that I'm getting out of Lightwave and this render, and very quickly as well. And if I wanted to go in and add motion blur, it's something I could do right inside of Lightwave, or I could do it in post in After Effects. So basically that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial for Lightwave and its dynamics and animation engine, and I'd like to see some cool physics simulations from you guys in the future. So if you do, leave them in a video response, and take care. See you next time.
If you'd like to see more behind the scenes videos or visual effects tutorials, consider subscribing to this channel. You can also leave a comment below telling me exactly what type of video you'd like to see. If you want to help me out, you can like this video or share it on your favorite social media sites. You can even follow me on Twitter. Thanks for watching. I'm Jack Diamond, and I'll see you next time.